there seems to be no letting up in writing and publishing of books during the pandemic. Is that one of the good things coming out of the pandemic? Perhaps. Welcome to Oral Tradition and another adventure in Guyanese literature. On this episode, we look at a book that covers a lot of ground. It's entitled Marble, Grass, and Glass, and it's authored by Sham Moteelall. Sham, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, initial questions, always. What led you, or what are the factors leading to marble, grass, and glass?
Well, being a person of indentured servants from India, I was always curious as to where they came from, the process they went through, the journey they took, and when they get here, what happened to them one generation after another. And this whole thing started back in about 1800 from India through the journey and eventually end up in Guyana for 5 generations. And I just went start interviewing people, asking questions, stories, telling whatever, And I thought, these are fascinating stories, and we need to tell these stories. So I was going to do this to tell my kids and grandkids and future generation. But in the last 5 to 10 years, I realized that, there's never been a book like this published that tells some real stories, and the more I look into it, the stories are quite accurate. And for example, my great-grandfather, my father told me he had a scar on his back, and his identification mark on his papers, that was he has this long scar on his back. So there's a lot of stories like that. So I believe these stories are very accurate. These people could not read and write, so obviously they tell stories, one generation after another. I got a little passionate about this when I started understanding the process and realizing that some of these people, most of them were not treated very well, especially the women. And the recruiting process was horrible, and that I didn't get angry. I was a little disappointed, saying that, why did they do this? And then I realized at the time that, of course, the British had control, not only in different parts of the world, but the East India Company, they
Yes.
were quite popular, and so they bypassed the system, a little bit of nepotism, a little bit of whatever, and it was easy to get people to come. But then they had this rule that before the ship could sail, they had to have at least 40% women at that time, about 1850, 1860. And they couldn't get enough women to come, so they decided to start kidnapping them and, lying, whatever, flummox them to come, And that was surprising to me. So I started delving more and more into it, and eventually I thought, I'm going to write a book. This thing has to be told because there are stories that people do not know. So I did not write this book just for me and my family. I wrote this, first of all, for Caribbean people, but I wrote this book for the human race.
In an earlier conversation, I said I like the the end of the book.
The epilogue?
The epilogue and things like that.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at chapter 18. Who were
these
those
people?
people?
Yep.
Introduced, well, there are some characters in here. There are some characters.
Every family has them.
Right. And you've built some great portraits of some of these people.
Yeah.
Let's look at some of these people, and then we can go back to the beginning.
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
Who were those people?
Well, it started out, first of all, with my great-great-grandmother, and she was a very wealthy person, come from a very wealthy family. Her father was one of these men that worked directly with the British, and so he got treated very well. And I call her Lady because that's what everybody calls her. She's a little girl. The British call her Lady, so her name is Lady. She went to school. She became a classical dancer, and she was a good dancer, and she was very privileged. And then she got married, and one day she was going on vacation with 2 or 3 kids, and on the chariot, and they went different places. And they got caught in a storm in the monsoons or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the chariot guy took off with their money and everything and abandoned them. And then the next day, they were hungry and sitting by the roadside after the storm passed. And this guy came along. I call him Scarface. He had a scar at his cheek. And said, you know, I can take you where you want to go. And she said, we want to go to the closest inn or something like this. Well, he took them to the prison depot, basically, and transported them from one place to the next. And eventually they put them in this, the ship, and she and her 2 children got shipped to Guyana. Amid all the protests, nobody listened. And being a beautiful, privileged lady, she couldn't work in the plantation. So for payment, she was everybody's woman in authority. So the abuse started there.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by lady. You know, I mean, a lady of some standing.
Yeah.
All right, and she had a chariot to move around with. But then you said she was caught up in the recruitment or was kidnapped.
She was kidnapped.
Right. And she had no voice.
Oh, she screamed, and they tried to escape and everything, but this man was, you know, big, strong man, and he just basically, what the guy did when they tried to escape, he had a gun, and he put it on her son's head, and he said, you ever try this, I'll shoot him in front of you. And so they were scared. And they had, the process was they could go and complain to the authorities, but sometimes you cannot fight the devil's case in hell and expect to win, you know?
Yeah.
And so it was a bad system, and these people got treated badly.
Yeah.
She died, you know, she died in shame, and you know, I feel that, you know, all of them, but especially her, the pain and suffering she went through, I decided to immortalize her in words.
Good. Let's move on to another main character.
Mr. Pyru?
Some story.
Yeah. Mr. Pyru was interesting. His real name was Vishnu. And he was the son of a very wealthy Brahmin family. And he did not like the British. So they formed this rebel band, and he was with this man called Nana Sahib. Nana Sahib is a very popular guy as far as leading the rebellion. And so he was smart. He went to the ashram, very intelligent man, boy, what at a time. And he would gamble with the British, and he would win. And he'd use the money when he win to fund the rebels. Eventually, they were getting caught up with him, and so he escaped. And well, they had this the Sepoy Revolution, the Sepoy of 1857. Everybody know about that, where thousands of people got killed. And in fact, when I was in India, I went and I spent time in the battlefield, and all the cannons and all the buildings and the bombardments and everything's still there, you know. And all the pictures on the wall. But it was told, the stories there are told by the British, so there's two sides to everything, you know.
Well, of course.
Yeah, so I had to use my discretion, but I was wondering why most of the people got massacred and these upper echelon people escaped. And so I walked a little further over, and there was the Gumti River. And I think these guys had a boat hidden there that in the event this would happen. So Nana Sahib burnt a lot of people in the river and stuff, and then he jumped to his boat with his few friends, and they escaped. I think that's what happened. I wasn't there. But he went, and they changed his name from Vishnu. There was a Chamar guy, they said, that recently died. So they ignored him and buried him, and they gave the name Pyru to my great-grandfather. And so being that he came from this background, he was a very good martial arts guy. He could fight. He learned martial arts. And
we'll talk about that when we get to Guyana.
Yeah. No, this is in India. So
but then I think that skill came over with him.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll talk more about that.
Sure.
Because that's one of the way he was able to buy his way out of the plantation.
Yep.
But don't let's get ahead of the story.
Sure.
Let's go to another main character, perhaps.
Well, there was Mr. Dasai.
Yeah.
And Dasai was my grandfather, my father's father. And he lived in a village called Arajila in India, in Uttar Pradesh. And his parents were farmers, you know, caste system, they call him ahirs. He was supposed to be a farmer.
Farmer, yeah.
And they had cattle.
Cattle miner, yes.
Cattle, and that's it. But they had a bunch of buffalo. And back then, they married these as babies, you know, they had child bride, whatever. So he was married to this girl in the village, but they didn't know who the girl, he didn't know, his parents knew who the girl was. So there was this beautiful girl in the village, and she liked him, and he thought this goddess, the beautiful girl, that's his wife, our future wife, you know. And he worshipped her, and he always thought that's going to be his girl. So he always had this vision, like young men do, about having his beautiful girl, and he could, start his own whatever. Well, as it turned out, he was married to probably the least desirable girl in the village, who was very annoying and cantankerous and whatever, and he did not like her. He did not like her at all. And he told his parents, no way, I'm not taking her. So there's a lot of stuff happened, and he got very depressed. And one day when he was taking care of his cattle, he fell asleep. He had an old bull or old oxen that he used to ride on. And he fell asleep on the oxen's back, and the cattle meandered. They went to this farmer's rice field, was eating up the crop, and the farmer got very upset, and he came, started beating up on him. They got into a fight. The guy had a stick. He hit the man in the head. The man died. He was bleeding in the rice field, and so he got scared. He said, no, first of all, I'm a criminal, and now, I'm a criminal. I'm supposed to marry this ugly girl. I'm not staying here. She started running. And he found some pundit in some church, and he begged for forgiveness, and the pundit told him to wash the blood off his hand, he has to go bathe in the ocean. So that's how he went to Calcutta. For how he got there, I don't know. And he ended up working on a ship called Alina as a porter. And eventually he stayed at the Port Morant estate in Berbice. He actually died in the 1918 pandemic. So I wrote about that when I was first writing this book, and I was talking about pandemics, and then this pandemic, I don't want to take, this pandemic that we're living through right now, was something that, I was quite familiar with pandemic in the world.
Yeah, I mean, you devoted a whole page to pandemics,
yeah.
Right?
And it was just a kind of a lesson to the human race that be careful. Pandemics will come, but in the first pandemic, about 25% of the world population died. If
it's amazing. When you hear the stats.
Yeah. Today it'd be 2 billion people. He would die from. So.
Yeah.
So he died and he left his children in the roadside. His wife died when my dad was born as a childbirth. So my uncle and my dad became orphans on the streets, and they suffered quite a bit because nobody took care of them then. So that's a whole different story.
Yeah, we'll talk about that now that we've crossed the ocean, the dark waters.
Kalapani.
By way of the ship Lena.
Yeah.
And we in Guyana, British Guyana.
Right.
The first landing was in
Demerara.
Rumpelt to us?
Well, yeah, like Lady and her family, they went to Rumpelt Estate. Dasai went to Port Morant, and people, there's other characters. Well, Pairu went to Rumpelt, and there's this lady named, we call her Kalia, and her husband was Kangal. They were my great-grandparents on my dad's side. They came from different villages, and I knew their story also, but they also end up at the Port Morant estate.
You talk about your book being different, and I think this may be one of the difference between all the writings on indentureship, in that most of the writings tend to focus on the plantations in the Berbice.
Right.
This one is focused on Georgetown, Rumpelt, Georgetown. Even Rodney wrote about Rumpelt.